Hello, everybody. A little bit of a different start today, as I'm not, playing music beforehand, or we're not seeing the starting soon screen. But welcome to the extra part of Trails of Cold Steel 4. Today we'll be doing the book reading stream part 1. There may or may not be a part 2 by the time this recording is finished, but I'll be going through and reading all the books that the game has to offer. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. First tale we will be reading is A Cocoa Panda's Tale. Also, keep in mind that while I will be mainly soft voice for the majority of this stream, I do not know what the books actually are. So if there is some yelling and or some strong emotions, then my voice will go higher, just in case you are closing your eyes. But without further ado, let's continue. Part 1. Tamaro the Loner. My name is Yui, and I'm a Cocoa Panda. People call us monsters, but we're not all bad. Some of us are actually very nice, just like my friend Tamaro. He and I have known each other since we were cubs. Our whole lives, he was the kind of guy who did everything on his own, so everyone in our pack thought of him as a strong, independent loner. But I thought it must get hard having to do everything alone. That's why I decided to follow him one day and make sure he was okay. I hid behind a bush and watched him climb to the top of a big tree to get his dinner. After a while, he came back down, nice big fruit in his paws. I breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed like he would have more than enough to eat tonight. But just then, I took a better look at the fruit he had found and let out a small gasp. It was rotten. Inside, it was icky, mushy, and full of bugs. To make things worse, it was getting dark, and he wouldn't have any time to look for more. All us Cocoa Pandas know that it's much too dangerous to wander around outside at night. Tamaro noticed how rotten his fruit was, too. He looked up at the setting sun, and with a short sigh, he picked up his fruit and started to head back to our camp for the night. I followed him back to our den, making sure not to be seen, but then I heard his tummy grumbling. He must have been really hungry. I watched as he glanced at his fruit with a sour expression, then held his nose and prepared to take a bite. "Tamaro, stop!" I shouted, dashing out from my hiding place. "You can't eat that fruit. It's rotten." I grabbed it out of his paw just in time. Though he was surprised at first, the expression on his face quickly turned to a frown. "What's your problem, Yui? You can't tell me what to eat." I was taken aback by how rude he was being. I was only trying to help. I got so flustered I ended up speaking my mind to him right there and then. "Look, if you can't find any food yourself, that's okay. All you need to do is ask someone to share with you." "No way," he scoffed. "Asking for help is like admitting you're too weak to do it on your own." "Don't be silly," I scolded him. "It only makes sense for us to all help each other out." "You're the only one who thinks that, Yui," he grumbled, crossing his arms. I couldn't understand why he was being so stubborn. Did he not trust the rest of us? Or was he just too proud to admit he was wrong? Well, let's find out, shall we? I called one of the other Cocoa Pandas from our pack over to us. "Oh, there you two. Something wrong?" he said in a leisurely drawl as he walked over to Tamaro and I. "We had trouble finding any good fruit today. Could we have some of yours?" I asked. "Oh, is that all? No problem. Here you go," he said, handing each of us a fresh piece of fruit. I thanked him and waved goodbye as he left. "See?" I turned to Tamaro. It's really just that easy. There's nothing to be ashamed of. In return, we just need to help the others out when they need it." Tamaro made a face like he wanted to object, but ended up taking the fruit all the same. Feeling like I'd finally gotten through to him, at least a little bit, I went back to my bed, hoping that he'd learn to rely more on others. By the time I woken up the next day, it was already past lunchtime. I was still a little worried about Tamaro, so I decided to keep an eye on him again. I went and snuck behind a bush and peeped through the leaves, but what I saw made my heart jump, right into my throat. Something was very wrong. Tamaro was covered in cuts and bruises, and he was growling more fiercely than I'd ever heard him before. "Tamaro, what's wrong? Are you okay? I asked timidly, coming out of my hiding place. He didn't seem to hear me. He didn't even react to me at all. He just kept staring at the path leading out of the forest and growling. I looked in the direction he was facing and saw a human walking down the path. As soon as I did, I knew something bad was about to happen. I reached my paw out, trying to place it on Tamaro's shoulder. Before I could get close enough, however, he leapt at the human, tore away the bag they were carrying, and ran off deep into the woods. I was horrified. This wasn't like Tamaro at all. I knew him better than anyone, and he'd absolutely never attack someone like that. There was only one explanation. He'd given into his instincts and become a mindless beast. Part 2. Yuyui's Stand. I sprang up suddenly, panicked and confused. After a moment or two, I realized I was back in my bed. I slowly calmed myself and laid back down. It was all just a bad dream, right? It had seemed so real, though. I looked around. My tummy was telling me it was still early, closer to breakfast time than lunch. I didn't think what had happened in my dream was real, but I was still worried about Tamaro, so I went to check up on him, just in case. However, I arrived at his bed to find it empty. Feeling a sinking sensation in the pit of my stomach, I called out to him, "Tamaro, where are you?" As if in reply, a fearsome howl echoed off in the distance. Tamaro's bed was the farthest one out in our camp. Out of everyone, he was the most at risk of being attacked by outsiders. I immediately took off, running as fast as my legs could carry me in the direction the howl had come from. Before long, I had reached the forest on the edge of the camp. I spotted Tamaro in the middle of a clearing. He was crouched low to the ground, holding a weapon he'd made of an old gourd. I could tell from where I was that he was injured. His attention was focused entirely on his opponent, a bracken monkey. It must have been what made that howl I heard. "Something's wrong with that monkey. He must have gone feral," I gasped under my breath. Even monsters who can normally control their instincts can be driven wild and lose their minds, especially when they're hungry or hurt. Just like what happened in my dream. Sometimes, a strong blow to the head will bring them back to their senses, but often, they'll never return to their old selves. They leave their packs and vanish into the wilds. I glanced at Tamaro. He was already hurt pretty badly. I wondered if the Tamaro from my dream was injured by this same bracken monkey. If the real Tamaro was hurt anymore, he might turn feral too. Before I realized it, I had stepped between him and the monkey. "Don't worry, Tamaro, I'll protect you," I said. "Yui," he gasped. I was so relieved to hear him call my name. Tears started running down my face. He hadn't gone feral. That part of my dream hadn't come true, at least. "Hey," Tamaro exclaimed, "this is no time to be crying. This guy's gone wild. We need to knock him out fast or..." His voice trailed off. A look of alarm spread across his face as he glanced behind me. I turned around just in time to see the bracken monkey launch a flying kick right at my head. "Yui, look out!" Tamaro gasped. Right at the last second, I parried the monkey's kick and counterattacked, sending it flying straight into a thick tree trunk. The wind knocked out of it. The monkey looked shocked and confused for a moment before passing out. "Wow, that really was a close one. I sure am glad I learned that move from the creepy sheep," I said as I dusted myself off. Tamaro let out a deep sigh, and he slumped down on the ground. "I should have known you'd be okay," he said. "You're the strongest one in our whole pack, after all." "Well, a girl's gotta know a good self-defense move or two," I giggled. I realized then that I had Tamaro's complete attention. I knew it could be my chance to finally get through to him. Why didn't you call for help as soon as that bracken monkey attacked you?" I asked, frowning. "Huh, why should I call for help when it's something I could have handled myself?" he shrugged. "But you weren't handling it, and even if you had won the fight, you're so injured, you might have ended up going feral too," I told him. "Yeah, well, so what if I had?" he scoffed. "That's got nothing to do with you." I couldn't believe that he'd had the nerve to say that to me. Didn't he realize how much I cared about him? I couldn't take it anymore. While I'm normally a very patient panda, he'd gone too far. I grabbed Tamaro by the shoulders and I looked him right in the eyes. "Listen, Tamaro, I know how hard you work. I agree with you that getting help from others all the time without trying for yourself is just being lazy. But you're not that kind of panda. Don't let your fears stop you from getting help when you need it. You can rely on everyone in the pack. You can rely on me. You might like the idea that you're some strong, independent loner, but in reality, when you push everyone away, you're just being self-absorbed. I stopped to catch my breath and waited for Tamara to say something in response. He lowered his face. I couldn't tell what he was thinking. After a moment, he opened his mouth and began to speak. Yui, I didn't hear anything past that. There was a foot sound, and suddenly a sharp pain shot through the back of my head. I started to feel dizzy, but I sensed something moving around behind me. I figured the monkey must have woken up and thrown a stone at me. I was quickly losing consciousness, but I knew if I passed out, Tamara would keep trying to fight on his own. He might end up turning feral. Please, Tamara, I gasped. I don't want to lose you. I'd be so sad if I couldn't see you anymore. There was so much I wanted to tell him, but I just couldn't find the words. My head was swimming. It became harder and harder to think straight. As a panda who's very conscious about being ladylike, it's a little hard for me to admit this, but I knew all my self-defense training had made me too tough for this to kill me. So why? Why was I... And then it happened. My thoughts slipped away and were replaced by pure instinct. I had become a mindless, feral Coco Panda. Part 3. Tamara's Decision. My name is Tamara, and I'm a Coco Panda. I prefer to do things on my own, so I don't spend a lot of time with the others in my pack. When I'm in a crowd, all I can see is everyone hiding their true intentions, subtly fighting over territory, obsessing over social standing, giving fruit, just to make sure someone else owes them a favor. It all makes me sick. That's why I moved my bed out to the edge of camp. I thought I could avoid all that stuff, live on my own and solve my own problems. But Yui, a panda I'd known since we were cubs, was always pestering me. We're both usually in the same part of camp, so why don't we hang out for a while? She'd ask. We're only in the same part of camp because you moved your bed closer to where mine is, I'd think to myself. Tamara, stop! You can't eat that fruit. It's rotten, she said, grabbing my food out of my hand. Honestly, I'd rather eat rotten fruit than have to go to beg someone else for theirs. Why didn't you call for help as soon as that bracket monkey attacked you? She grabbed me, tears still in her eyes. I didn't have an answer. Maybe deep down part of me knew if I was in trouble, she'd come to my rescue. You might like the idea that you're some strong, independent loner, but in reality, when you push everyone away, you're just being self-absorbed. She was right. Anytime things got truly difficult for me, I'd end up relying on her help in the end. I was only being so stubborn because I wanted to think that I could handle things on my own. The whole time, I'd been acting tough. I couldn't keep it up anymore. Yui, I don't work hard at all. I'm just a pathetic excuse for a panda who's done nothing but take advantage of your kindness. I was only fooling myself, thinking I was fine on my own. I'm such an idiot. But it was too late now. She probably couldn't even understand what I was saying anymore. She'd become a wild beast. I watched as she approached the bracken monkey snarling. It only took a few quick strikes from her before the monkey was collapsed in a heap on the ground. I could tell he wouldn't be waking up anytime soon, but I knew I couldn't relax just yet. Her opponent defeated, Yui began to gnaw at the fern-like crest on his head. I could only imagine that she saw it as just another plant in her feral state. Yui, stop! I pleaded. Don't eat that! This isn't like you. I grabbed her and tried to pull her away, but it was of no use. She was the strongest Coco Panda I knew. Even if I hadn't been exhausted from the battle, I wouldn't have been able to budge her. I wasn't about to give up though. I couldn't let my best friend lose herself like this. I looked around for a way to help her, and saw my weapon lying on the ground nearby. I thought that if I hit her with it just right, it might bring her back to her senses. But no, it was too risky. If I messed up, it'd just make her angry, and if I had to fight her, I could end up going feral too. Yui wouldn't want that. You said you didn't want to lose me. I looked at her and dusted myself off. Well, I don't want to lose you either, and I don't care what I have to do. It's time I stopped acting tough. I took a deep breath and shouted for help as loud as I possibly could. I shouted until I was completely out of breath. It was the first time in my life I'd ever asked for help, but I didn't care anymore. Getting Yui back to normal was the only thing that mattered to me. In mere moments, our entire pack had come to my side. When we heard you finally asking for help, we were all so happy. The whole pack came running, one of them said to me. I recognized him. He was the same panda who shared his food with us the other night. I never knew he could move that quickly. He'd always seemed kind of dopey to me, but now his eyes were sharp and focused. It's Yui. She got hurt protecting me, and now she's gone feral. Please, I need your help to calm her down. I stumbled over my words, trying to get them out as quick as I could. Everyone banded together to drag Yui away from the monkey and hold her still. Then, with a swift blow to the head, they knocked her out. She slumped to the ground and lay there, as if she'd simply fallen asleep. That ought to do the trick. Now we better go and grab some of her favorite berries. That's the smell will help wake her up, the helpful Coco Panda said. The others all went to gather some berries and placed them in a neat little pile right in front of Yui's face. After a few moments, her nose began to twitch, smelling the sweet fragrance, and her eyes fluttered open. Huh? I'm okay? She said. Still a bit groggy. I couldn't believe my eyes. She was back to her old self. I was immediately overcome with relief, so much so that I might have even cried a little. It was then I finally understood how she must have felt when she came to save me. Tamaro, are you okay? My head hurts a little, but other than that, I'm fine, and... Huh? What are all of you doing here? She looked at the rest of our pack with a bewildered expression. It was no wonder she was confused. I bet she never expected me to swallow my pride and ask the whole pack for help. Everyone looked on with warm smiles as I took Yui's paw in mine. I decided there and then that I wouldn't try to act tough anymore. I was going to tell her exactly how I felt. It's just like you said. It only makes sense for us to all help each other out. I turned to the rest of our pack. Thank you, everyone, for helping us. And thank you, Yui, I said, turning back to her, for always being there for me. From that day on, I decided to give the other Coco Pandas a chance. It turned out that working together isn't so bad every now and then. We're all friends now, and the days I spend with Yui and the others are filled with smiles. The second story is If You Say Goodbye. Chapter 1, Halcyon Days. No, this wasn't meant to happen. The inventor stared down at what he'd created, feeling no sense of accomplishment, only regret. Where had his life's work gone so wrong? And more importantly, could he find a way to fix his terrible mistake? For as long as he could remember, Sai had always loved building things, toys in particular. Day and night, he would toil in his workshop, dreaming up new playthings and bringing them into the world with his own two hands. People thought he was eccentric, to put it kindly. It kept their distance. At least the adults did. For the children of the town, going to the park and playing with Sai's toys was a rare pleasure. He was always surprising them with new creations and wondering what he would come up with next. Wondering what he would come up with next could be just as fun as seeing the final product. Sai, what are you making now? Martha tugged at Sai's sleeve, stretching up on tiptoes to see over the top of his workbench. Well, if it works out, these shoes will let you slide around like you're on ice wherever you go. Whoa, that's so cool. Hey, can you make them leave behind like a colory trail on the ground too? And the little girl bounced around the room, shouting out new ideas as they came to her. She was Sai's biggest fan, and in spite of the difference in their ages, also his best friend. If Sai was developing a new toy, you could bet Martha would be there too, offering advice or just watching him work. Is watching me really that much fun? He'd asked her once. Well, yeah, she replied. You always look so happy when you're making things, so that makes me happy too. Sai was on his way to the park to show off his latest inventions. He never took money from the children. Seeing their faces light up with joy was reward enough for him. He stumbled through the city streets, holding a pile of toys against his chest and doing his best not to knock into anyone. Sai! Sai! Sai came to a stop and looked around. Was that Martha calling him? Yes, it had to be. Even in a crowd of people like this, he'd know her voice anywhere. He'd arranged to meet her at the park like always, so why was she here? Sai scanned the oncoming sea of people for signs of his friend. Had the streets always been this crowded? There were other voices now, people yelling, "Run!" and "Get out of the way!" Finally, Sai caught sight of Martha and in the same moment realized what was going on. He ran toward her, the toys he'd been carrying clattering carelessly to the ground. "Martha! Over here! Quick!" She reached out a hand to him, but it was too late. As the runaway horse-drawn carriage tore through the crowd, everything became a cacophony of crashing, crunching, and screaming. And then, nothing. The rain came down hard, soaking Sai's hair and mingling with the tears running down his face. He ignored it and continued to gaze at the tiny grave. "Don't you want to play with me anymore, Martha?" There was no answer. "Please, play with me. Try out my toys like you used to. Tell me how to make them better, how to make them more fun." The tears wouldn't stop coming, but Sai barely even noticed them anymore. "Wait for me. I'll make something new, something you can play with even the way you are now. It'll be fun. So just wait for me." Chapter 2. At Any Cost. Over the next 2 years, Sai made countless trips to the cemetery. Every time he laid toys on Martha's grave and the graves of other children, hoping for a chance to see them laugh and play again as they had in his life. "It's only polite to share, right, Martha? These kids don't seem to like my toys so much, though. What am I doing wrong?" Day after day, Sai would speak to the empty air in front of the little gravestone. One day, he was sure he'd come back to find that the toys had moved or disappeared, that he was getting through to his old friend. But that day never came. Maybe it's the materials I'm using. Is that why you can't touch these? If we think about it that way, then... His head alive with new ideas, Sai left the toys and shuffled back to his workshop to try something new. Time marched onward, and the young toy maker continued to place offerings at the grave to no avail. Then one evening, as the sun was going down, something occurred to him, an idea very different from his usual way of thinking. "If I could find a way to give you a body again, you could play with these just fine. Why hadn't he thought of that before?" Finally, he had a direction to take his research. 30 long years went by. Sai worked like a man possessed, barely eating or sleeping. His workshop deteriorated into a grimy, chaotic mess. His body became thin and emaciated, but he worked on, chasing after every last scrap of arcane knowledge he could find. He was determined to see Martha again, no matter the cost. It was a cold, crisp morning as Sai walked along the all-too-familiar path to Martha's grave, a complex mess of steel and wires held under his arm. This was the result of his labors, a device that could, in theory, be used to give a spirit physical form. He switched it on, and it began to emit a strange noise. It started as a low-pitched drone, but gradually got higher and higher, penetrating through the air, through stone buildings, even through living flesh. It was as if the whole reality was being strained to its breaking point. The machine stopped, and Sai looked around him. He didn't see Martha anywhere. Did it work? Something in the air didn't feel right. Picking up his device, Sai sulked away to investigate. Even before he reached town, it was obvious that all was not well. It was too quiet. Even at this time of day, there should be crowds of people bustling around as they made their way to work. Sure enough, the streets were full of people now, but every last one of them had fallen to the ground. They lay there, motionless, as if the life had been drained out of them, leaving only empty husks. What is this? I was trying to convert souls into physical matter, not this, so why? Sai felt his knees begin to buckle as he began to realize the full horror of what he had done. He ran throughout the town, desperate to find another living human. There had to be somebody out there besides him. No, this is all wrong. This wasn't meant to happen. Sai sank to his knees as despair gripped his heart. They were all gone. He'd spent his life trying to make contact with the dead, and now he was the only living man left. Chapter 3. Farewell. All Sai had wanted to see was Martha again, to make toys for his old friend and see her smile. How had such a simple desire led him to commit this atrocity against the laws of nature? The device felt heavy in his hands, but he kept hold of it all the same. Where did I go wrong? How could I possibly make up for this? Somebody, please, somebody tell me what to do! For a moment, it felt like something had brushed Sai's shoulder. It was probably just his imagination. He was so desperate for human contact, his mind was playing tricks on him. But he couldn't help looking all the same. Nobody there. Of course not. I'm all alone. The street was deathly silent, without so much as a breeze to disturb the fallen leaves on the ground. Sai smirked, ashamed of his old foolishness. How could he have let himself get his hopes up like that? Aw, I finally got to see you smile again, but you don't look happy at all. Aw, I finally got to see you smile again, but you don't look happy at all. Sai knew that voice. He'd know it anywhere. He'd spent most of his life wishing he could hear it again. Martha? Is that you? Please, if you're here, show yourself. Talk to me, Martha! He didn't care if it was real or a hallucination anymore. If Martha was here, there was hope. Sai broke into a run, scrambling through the streets, but there was no sign of Martha. Only her voice remained. You've been crying for such a long time, Sai. I thought you'd have found something to smile about by now. I'm not crying. Why would I be sad? It's not like you're gone. We'll see each other again someday, so... Even as he spoke, Sai realized he was wrong. His cheeks were wet with tears. How long had he been crying? Had he ever stopped since the day Martha was killed? No. Deep down, I always knew that you were gone, that you weren't coming back. He tried to deny this, buried himself in his work to avoid thinking about it, but there was no more hiding from the truth. I used to love making toys. I loved seeing the kids in the park play with them, but it was having my best friend alongside me that made it all worthwhile. I couldn't accept that you were really gone, Martha, that you were really dead. The words came spilling out, and Sai became aware of a bright light that hadn't been there before. It was so dazzling he had to shield his eyes against it. All the long hours in his workshop over the last 30 years had made him indifferent to things like weather and natural light. Now, a long-forgotten sensation was beginning to stir in his mind. He remembered what it was like to walk with warm sunshine kissing his skin. Sai fell to his knees. When he opened his eyes, he found himself face to face with his old friend. I'm sad we won't get to play anymore too, but so long as you can move on and keep living your life, I'll be right there with you. A smile finally broke through Sai's tears, a genuine one this time, one that made him look much more like his old self again. I have to move on, don't I? Oh, Martha, I must have made you so sad all this time. Right? That machine you made is cool and all, but it's just not you. You always seemed happier when you were making toys. I guess you're right. When I try to make anything else, it always goes wrong. They stayed like that for some time, chatting and catching up as if nothing had changed. In the midst of that cold, empty world, there were still two souls with warmth in their hearts. It was like a dream come true, but during a break in their conversation, Sai realized how quiet the rest of the town was. It was time for the dream to end. I have to go, but before everyone comes back, I told Adios that you're not a bad person, and you didn't mean to do this. She said she'd forgive you if you can let me go. Martha took a step backwards. Goodbye, Sai. I'm really happy I got to be friends with you, and I like you better when you smile. Sai took a deep breath and rose to his feet. He had to do this right. Tears were streaming down his face, but he kept his voice steady. Thank you, Martha. I'm so glad I got to see you again. And don't worry, I won't let you down. I'll live a good life, and I'll make you proud. 2 words from him, and the miracle that he worked so hard to achieve would be over. Part of him wanted to keep hiding from the truth, to make this moment last forever. But that temptation soon passed. He knew what he had to do, and he'd see off his old friend with the brightest smile he could muster. He wanted Martha to remember him like this. Goodbye, Martha. The girl was already starting to fade from view, as if melting into the sunlight. She kept waving the whole time, until finally she was gone. Sai became dimly aware of a strange sound, a low-pitched drone that was gradually getting higher and higher. The world seemed to change in the blink of an eye. The town was once more teeming with life, the people on their feet again and going about their business like nothing had happened. Sai walked through the streets in a daze. Perhaps it was instinct, or nostalgia, or Adios' guidance that led him to the park. Children gathered around him, looking at the strange machine under his arm. "Hey, mister, what's that thing? What's it for? How does it work?" Sai smiled. He knelt down and started tearing apart his invention, rearranging the components into something completely different. Ta-da! It's a butterfly. It uses orbital energy and the wind to fly. Wow, cool! I want one too! Let's have a race and see who can fly the farthest. Sai worked quickly, and in a few minutes the sky was alive with dancing butterflies and the laughter of children. The next story is The Legendary Chosen One. Chapter 1. Awakening. Ondel's village was way out in the middle of nowhere. It didn't have any famous landmarks or specialty goods. There was no reason for anyone to visit it at all. Little by little, and more of the villagers had to move out, or at least commute to Heimdall for work. Ondel was a curious boy by nature, so when his father offered to take him to the capital one day, he jumped at the chance. He wanted to see what made this place so special. It wasn't long before he found out. Back home, nothing ever seemed to change from day to day, year to year, but the big city was full of all kinds of things he had never seen before. "I need to go to work, so stay here in this plaza and play until I'm done," his father told him. "Okay, don't forget to snag me a souvenir." Ondel looked around the plaza. There were plenty of other children there, but his eyes were drawn to 3 kids standing off to one side. They were striking dramatic poses and making strange, exaggerated movements. That didn't look like any game he'd seen before. "Hi, what are you guys playing?" "We're playing Legendary Heroes. We only learned it ourselves a while back." Ondel's eyes lit up with excitement. "Whoa, that sounds so cool. How'd you find out about it?" "It's a funny story. These weird kids showed up one day and taught everyone how to play, but none of us had ever seen them before, and they talked kinda weird, like they were from olden times or something." "Awesome! I wish I could get cool ideas like that." "We don't know how much of it is true, but whatever. Don't think about it too much and just have fun with it." "Sounds good. Can you teach me how to play too?" The game of Legendary Heroes involves setting up a peculiar ritual with tree branches to infuse you with ancient power. When that was done, the first thing that popped into each hero's head became their sacred mission. Before long, Ondel and the others had become fast friends, and soon enough, his father arrived to take him home. The next day, Ondel went to tell his friends, Monty and Keith, about everything he'd seen in the capital, including the new game. "I don't know, it sounds kinda weird. Like, what do you even do?" Keith was always trying to act grown up. Sometimes it took a lot to convince him to join in with his friends' games. Monty, on the other hand, tended to be shy and timid, but he liked the sound of this. "If we don't have to fight bad guys or do anything scary, then maybe it won't be so bad. Yeah, and we might even turn to Legendary Heroes for real." "Yeah, right. Come on, let's get this over with. You'll probably get bored of it after an hour or so." Ondel set up the ritual just the way his new friend in the city had shown him. He gathered 10 tree branches and stuck them into the ground in a roughly circular pattern. Then he, Monty, and Keith stepped into the circle and chanted the magic spell. "We call upon the power of the Ancient Ones." Each friend then picked up one of the sticks and held it aloft like a sword. "So, the other sticks are our magic circle, right?" "Right, it's filling us with ancient power, just like the heroes from olden times." Ondel struck a dramatic pose, as if this moment was far too important to let pass without doing something special to mark it. "Would you're gonna, huh?" Keith was cut off by a clatter as the 7 sticks all fell down one after another, forming a strange symbol. They began to glow, getting brighter and brighter, and soon the 3 friends were engulfed in an ethereal light. Ondel looked up at the sky and seemed to hear a solemn voice speaking directly into his mind. "Ye who have gathered here, I grant unto you the power to change your destiny." Part 2. Chapter 2. Conquest. The voice finished speaking, and 3 pillars of light descended from the heavens into the 3 boys. Then it vanished as quickly as it came. They looked at the sky again, and then at each other. Had all that been real? You think maybe we got so into the game that we started hearing things? No way. We all heard the same thing. It had to be real. That voice said it would give us power. Maybe we can, I don't know, use some kind of special skills now or something? Andal tried waving his arms around, but nothing happened. Come on, give us some kind of hint. Andal tried raising his arm one more time. Suddenly, there was a crackle of energy, and lightning, or something that looked a lot like it, started to shoot out of his palm. Whoa, did you see that? Come on, guys, you tried too. Following their friend's example, the other boys raised their hands. A wild wind shot out from Monty's, while Keith unleashed a torrent of water. Andal was thrilled. It worked! We got the hero's ancient power for real! With this, we could take over the world or something. That'd be cool, right? The others were less enthusiastic about their newfound powers. I could never do that. I get scared just talking in front of big groups of people. We can't go showing off this power to just anyone. We have to keep it a secret, or else people will try to use it for crimes and stuff. Andal couldn't believe his ears. What's wrong with you guys? We were given these powers for a reason. We can't just waste them. Well, fine. If you're a chicken, then I'll do it myself. Before they could reply, he stomped away, leaving them still a little dazed and confused about what had just transpired. I'll show them. I'll show them all. Taking over the world will be a cinch, and I'll start with the kids in the plaza. The next morning, Andal snuck out of his house and went to the capital alone. He found all the kids at the plaza and showed them his new trick. Check it out! It worked! I'm a real legendary hero now. Wow, that's so cool! You can shoot beams without using an orbment or anything. This was exactly the reaction Andal had been hoping for. What was wrong with Keith and Monty? Who wouldn't want to be a hero and have people admire them like this? I'm going to tell everyone about this and take over the world! Follow me! With another mighty cheer, they all set off joyously. Andal now set his sights on the city's grown-ups. He showed his power to them just as he had to the kids, but it didn't work out the way he expected. None of them took him seriously. They all thought it was just some kind of childish game and told them not to play with orbments. Andal grew impatient. He raised his palm again and again, and with each bolt he sent into the sky, the clouds got darker and darker. Before long, a storm was raging up above. Lightning struck an orbital streetlight, shattering the glass and bending the pole into a strange twisted shape. See, not just anyone can do that, right? That got their attention. People who had been passing by were now stopping to stare at the destruction. I'm going to use this power to become a legendary hero. Follow me to glory! Now they'd all fall in line and cheer for him. Or so Andal thought. One old man clearly had other ideas. And now look here, Sonny. Enough of this horseplay. You can't go around smashing things up like that. What would you have done if one of them bolts had hit someone, eh? What if you'd hurt one of your friends or burned someone's house down? His words shook Andal. They had an even more dramatic effect on the crowd. Everyone started to lose interest and wander off. Even the kids who'd followed him all this way. It's supposed to be the 3 heroes, right? Queried one kid. This guy's gotta be a fake. Slowly but surely, they all disappeared. I'm not a fake, it's true! You saw what I can do, right? I'm the chosen one! But they wouldn't listen. Dejected and alone, Andal dashed down a back alley. He was afraid he might burst into tears, and he didn't want anyone to see that. Eventually, he found himself at an empty lot. He thought he was finally alone, but then a man appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. Hey kid, you're one of those legendary heroes, right? Don't worry, I believe in you. You're the real deal, I can tell. Finally, someone who understood. Thanks. I was kind of starting to wonder if I had made some kind of mistake. The man knelt down so he could look at Andal right in the eye. Nah, I think the only mistake you made was not going far enough. Something about the way the man spoke was unsettling. Suddenly, Andal felt the pressure over his mouth, a strange smell, and he started to feel very sleepy. I can't believe he fell for it. Some chosen one he turned out to be. With that, the man hoisted Ondel over his shoulder and stuffed him into the back of an orbital car. Chapter 3: The Chosen Ones. When he woke up, Ondel was still in the back seat of the car. The strange man from before was driving. "Oh, you're awake. Don't get any funny ideas, alright? I got friends stationed in your village. You tried to escape, and I gave them the signal to torch the place. Understand?" "What are you gonna do with me?" Ondel was trying his best not to sound scared. "That's a real talent you got there. It's like you said, not just anyone can call down lightning without using a quartz or orbment. The way I see it, there's all kinds of ways I can make money off of you." The man spoke casually, as if kidnapping a child off the streets and threatening an entire village was the most natural thing in the world. Ondel hadn't been tied up or gagged, but he still felt trapped. There were probably countless ways to escape from the situation, but he had no choice but to stay put. "What am I doing?" he thought. "I don't have to do what this guy says. I could probably knock him out with a bolt of lightning. What if I mess up and kill him? What if he gets a signal out and his friends burn down the village?" Ondel remembered how the old man in Heimdall had scolded him for his irresponsible behavior, and the way his friends back home had acted. Heath and Monty were right. I'm no hero. Showing off just got people mad at me, and now I'm in this mess. Being given a special power that was uniquely his had gone to his head, but he saw the truth now. He was still just a kid, and the situation he'd been put in made him feel even more helpless than ever. The kidnapper smirked. "Say goodbye to Erebonian, kid. Odds are you ain't gonna see it again for a long time." There was no response. In fact, the back of the car was unusually quiet all of a sudden. Was the kid just sulking? He adjusted the rearview mirror. "Hey, I don't know what you're up to, but..." He was gone. There was no sign of Ondel anywhere. The kidnapper tried to twist around to see better, but the next moment, a shock went through his entire body. Ondel had crouched behind the driver's seat and unleashed one of his bolts. "Why, you little..." The shock wasn't enough to knock the kidnapper out, but it did slow him down long enough for Ondel to grab the steering wheel. The car veered off the edge of the road, swerving in every direction. "You idiot! You're gonna kill us both!" The kidnapper wrenched the wheel away just in time to avoid crashing into a tree, and slammed on the brakes. Hard. While he was doing that, Ondel used a lightning punch to shatter the passenger side window, giving him the perfect escape route. "So long, sucker! Thanks for slowing down for me." A moment later, he jumped, entrusting his safety to Adios. "I know, I'm just a kid. If anything really bad happens, there's no way I'll be able to make up for it. But I can't just sit around and let this happen. I figure I can still do something." For a moment, it seemed like Ondel was going to hit every branch on every tree before being dashed on the cliffs below. But then a blast of wind blew the branches aside and slowed his descent. He felt something, no, someone knock into him, and they both tumbled to the ground. They were shaken, but still very much alive. Ondel looked at the person who'd stepped in to rescue him. It was Monty, the boy who had been blessed with the power of wind. He was panting for breath, but still managed to choke out a wry laugh. "I never thought you'd actually get kidnapped. I thought that kind of stuff only happened in books." "Yeah, thanks, man. I would have been a goner for sure if you hadn't been here. And I'm sorry I got so carried away with the whole world domination fantasy. I was being really dumb." "No worries. I wasn't sure I could be brave enough to do something like this, but when I saw you jump out of the window, I didn't have to think about it. It just kinda happened." No sooner had Monty finished his speech than they heard a loud bang from behind him, where the orbital car had been. They quickly turned to look. When Ondel jumped, the kidnapper didn't chase after him. He was having enough trouble just trying to right the car and save his own skin. "Stupid brat! I'm gonna let the others know about this. You're in for it now." Driving out of the forest and back onto a solid road, he grabbed his communication device. The voice that answered him didn't sound like any of his allies. It sounded a lot younger. "Sorry, but your buddies are all tied up. You're the only one left. Ha! And it looks like you saved us the trouble of finding you." It was true. By some strange coincidence, the car had come to rest on the outskirts of Ondel's village. And there was Keith, holding another comm device and fixing the kidnapper with a fierce look. "Damn it! I don't know what's going on here, but I am sick and tired of you kids giving me the runaround. He floored the accelerator, ready to drive right through Keith if necessary. The boy stayed calm and sent a stream of water out of each of his hands, aiming at the car's front tires. They burst with a mighty bang, and the car spun out of control toward another large tree. Keith summoned another stream of water, turning the ground to mud and stopping the vehicle in its tracks. He sighed. And here I told Ondel we should keep these powers a secret, but I guess it's okay if we use them a little, even if it means helping people. With the kidnapper and his gang under lock and key, Ondel was free to return home to his friends and family. His parents scolded him for running off in the first place, but they hugged him that much harder now that they knew he was alright. At the time, he couldn't put how he was feeling into words. He could tell something had changed. He had taken his first real step towards growing up. This is just a story, of course, but you see the point I'm trying to make? Power on its own isn't good for anything. Whatever kind of strength or talent you might have, think hard about how you can use it to improve the lives of others. Understand? Yes, sir! It was another normal day at a normal little academy. Instructor Onda was well liked by his students. He always told the best stories. No one really knew what he did outside of working hours, though. And no one would ever connect him or his two friends to the mysterious team that worked so hard to protect the people of Erebonia from the shadows. This was a group no one knew for sure even existed. It was just a rumor, an urban legend. They had been chosen to wield power unlike anyone else, and in their own way, they had become heroes. The final story we will be reading is 3 and 9. Note, this story is technically considered a prologue and a minor requirement for Hajimari no Kiseki. Chapter 1. The Butler and the Lady. A single passenger ship prodigious size lay anchored to a port town in the northeast of the Principality of Remiferia. Extravagantly crafted from top to bottom, a single glance was enough to discern its intended clientele. The privileged few among society's upper crust. True to appearances, the passengers boarding the vessel that day most certainly fit the bill, each smartly dressed and adorned with conspicuous opulence. Even among guests, two stood out in particular. However, a young lady possessed of regal air, and the butler at her side. Judging from their attire, behavior, and linguistic register, they suited the setting to a prim and proper T. The single factor that set them apart from the other guests was their age. Neither looked to be much older than 12 or perhaps 13 years old, making them mere children in the eyes of most. Just one moment, my lady! The young butler labored to keep pace with the young lady as he dragged a large suitcase behind him. Despite this, she continued to stride forward, not slowing her pace in the slightest. Exhaustion creased his weary brow. His attire was proper, as befitting his station, but his unkempt hair, grown out long enough to completely obscure his eyes, was another story. On top of that, everything about his demeanor screamed that he was timid and weak of spirit. "Snap to it, you dullard!" the young lady briskly shouted, now several paces ahead of the struggling boy. "If you can't make those legs move any faster, I'll cut them off and feed them to the hounds." She continued to increase her pace while assailing her butler with an unending string of contemptuous words. Her arrogant, haughty demeanor stood in stark contrast to her graceful appearance. Dressed in a lovely black frilled dress, her blue eyes shone like a pair of sparkling saffrons, and her twin pigtails curled slightly in perfect arcs. Most eye-catching of all, however, was the 50 red stuffed bear she held close to her chest. Though it was large enough to draw attention, it didn't look out of place in the arms of a girl such as her. "Ah, please, my lady, forgive me!" In response to the girl's tirade, the boy miserably sputtered excuses and breathlessly pled for leniency as he summoned his remaining strength to pick up his pace. After a not insubstantial trip, the two finally arrived at the ship's boarding gate. "May I see your invitation and boarding passes?" The crew member working the gates asked, smiling politely. Up close, the ship was even more opulent, a prized possession of the Verne Company. Its main route was between Riveria and the Calva Republic via Lamelin Bay. For this particular trip, the entire ship had been reserved by one Haldor Barn, a wealthy merchant from Calvard. Passengers hoping to board required both a standard boarding pass as well as an explicit invitation from Mr. Barn himself. However, as each invitation included the room information for the guest in question, the boarding pass was strictly a formality. Gray! The girl called the boy by name and gestured with her hand, implicitly ordering him to present their credentials. Yes, my lady? What do you require of me? The boy asked, having completely failed to grasp his employer's unspoken instructions. You can't possibly be this dense, you stupid worm, she snapped. Oh, I am so sorry, my lady. I beg your forgiveness. Cowering before the young lady's vicious glare, the boy stuttered and stammered 1,000 apologies. Silence! The invitation and the boarding pass. Now! Right away, my lady. The boy began busily rustling through the contents of the suitcase, frantically searching for the requisite papers. Yet his haste quickly proved to be his downfall, for no sooner had he located the pass than a sudden gust of wind blew past, tearing the paper from his hand. Oh no! He exclaimed. The boy instinctively threw out his arms, stretching them to their physical limit, but his efforts were in vain. The boarding pass gently fluttered down to the bottom of the harbor, coming to rest gently on the water's surface. As though that wasn't bad enough, misfortune continued to hound the boy as a number of silhouettes swiftly appeared beneath the waterlogged document. A school of fish jumped into the air with a splash, spraying water all about. They then descended back into the harbor's depths, taking the hapless butler's boarding pass along with them. Ah! No! The boy's grief-stricken cry resonated through the harbor. Trembling with fear, he turned to face his master, prepared for an eruption of anger followed by a vicious tirade of abuse. Yet, it did not immediately come. The girl simply stood there in silence. She stared long and hard at the boy, her face betraying no expression whatsoever. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke. This was the calm before the storm. The boy began spitting out apologies, tripping over his words as his voice grew weaker by the second, like a short-circuit radio, warbling in its death knell. His body seemed to shrink, and his shoulders slumped like a criminal awaiting judgment. You are absolutely useless! The girl's anger finally burst forth in one violent blast. Despite the ferocity of her exclamation, she managed to save enough breath to launch a sharp kick at the boy at the same moment. The well-aimed strike sent the boy flying farther than a petite frame would suggest was possible. He seemed to hang in the air for a brief moment, before resuming his journey downward off the edge of the pier, reaching a frigid end as he broke through the water's surface with a splash. As soon as he returned to his senses, he began violently thrashing his arms about, pleading for aid between coughing up mouthfuls of cold water. "But my lady, please help me! Please help me!" he begged, his thrashing growing more desperate and frantic. "You're going to find that pass, and I mean now! You're not leaving that water until I see it in your hands!" "But I can't swim!" he burbled as his head began to slowly sink beneath the surface. "I'm well aware. Please, His words were cut short as his lungs filled with water and the rest of his head bobbed below the surface. His thrashing ceased and his silhouette grew faint as he quickly plummeted downward to the bottom of the bay. With the situation having reached an unacceptable level of risk, several onlooking crew members ran over to rescue the waterlogged butler. The moment the boy made it out of the bay, however, the still enraged girl tried to kick him right back in again. "Miss, please, you must calm down," the crew member at the gate said, trying to pacify the young noble. How? How can I be calm about this? My father was unable to attend, so I am here in his place. There are important business discussions taking place on this ship that I cannot afford to miss, and now, thanks to a certain someone's rank and competence, that is exactly what is going to happen." The girl gave the boy a menacing glare so virulent it could have stripped the paint from the entire vessel. "Tell me, worm, how exactly are you going to take responsibility for me being unable to board?" Though the boy was still coughing and violently spewing water, his already pallid face managed to lose what little color remained in it upon hearing those words. Feeling pity for the boy, the gate attendant stepped in. Well, for the time being, may I see your invitation instead? The boy moved to comply with his request, but was stopped dead in his tracks by the girl's menacing scowl. She produced the invitation herself and roughly shoved it at the attendant. The attendant read over the paper, then went through the list of names on the guest list. This invitation is for Baron Chris Reinhardt, who I can confirm is, indeed, on the guest list. Might I presume you two are his daughter and her attendant? You presume correctly. I am Baron Reinhardt's eldest daughter, Celica Reinhardt. The gate attendant made a respectful bow before continuing to speak. There will be no need to further concern yourself with the matter of the boarding pass, Miss Reinhardt. You may proceed. Oh? We may? Strictly speaking, a decision of this nature required approval from a high-ranking employee, but in this case, the gate attendant decided that swift action was the best way to provide a peaceful solution to the rapidly worsening situation at hand. It seems as though you'll live to ride another day, you useless worm. Count yourself lucky. The girl boarded the ship, still staring icy daggers at her butler. He dragged their luggage on after her, still wheezing and dripping wet from the event of the past few minutes. He effusively expressed his gratitude to the gate attendant as he passed, receiving a sympathetic smile and a few words of encouragement. Having finally boarded the ship, the two youths immediately headed for the room. Their pace was quick, as though they already knew the way, and not a single word was exchanged between them as they briskly walked down the halls. Once they arrived, they gave the room a quick yet thorough search. Infiltration complete. The girl broke their silence, suddenly speaking in a sleepy drawl. Her eyelids drooped as she let out a mighty yawn, and not a trace remaining of the tense, high-handed young lady from only a few moments ago. I'm beat, S. Think I'm gonna take a nap. She tossed her plush bear onto the bed and immediately launched herself after it. She dove under the covers with childlike exuberance befitting someone of her age, perhaps even younger. In contrast to her whimsical new demeanor, the boy remained completely expressionless. Don't let your guard down. The real mission begins now. Don't let your guard down. The real mission begins now. His voice was alarmingly calm and terse, as he brushed aside his bangs, still wet from the frigid water of the harbor. His now visible eyes were cold and sharp. Beneath that, however, was the gleam of a hunter fixed on its prey. Each and every ridge of his body exuded composure. The flustered, stammering butler from before was nothing but a memory. Though the girl's transformation was strange, the boy's sudden shift in personality was nothing short of jarring. That wasn't really your best work out there, S. Far from it. She spoke nonchalantly, rolling around the bed as she critiqued the boy's performance. He remained silent for a moment before speaking, almost as though he agreed with her assessment, at least in part. It didn't affect the mission. But you overdid each and every reaction. It's not easy to match that without seeming unnatural, you know? You hamming it up like that made us stand out more than we needed to. Despite her words, the girl's half-hearted tone took the bite out of her criticisms. These were the duo's true personalities. The upper-class young lady and her bumbling butler making a spectacle at the boarding gate were simply elaborate pageantry, an act necessary for gaining entry to the ship and nothing more. Any other method of infiltration might have raised suspicion, endangering their mission. Thus they chose to board under false identities. They had made clever use of the organization's info network beforehand, ascertaining which of the invitees would be unable to attend. Armed with this bit of intel, they created their personas. The invitations required for boarding were printed on high-quality paper, but ultimately differed only in name. Using the same layout for each invitation was a logical choice for a merchant looking to pinch Mira wherever possible. Logical or not, that particular decision had made the necessary forgery a walk in the park. The boarding pass, on the other hand, was a different story. The Verne Company was known to employ cutting-edge technology to prevent forgeries. Attempting to use a fake pass to board was an act accompanied by a considerable amount of risk. That is why the two engineered the dramatic performance that took place at the boarding gate. The boy dropping their boarding pass was, of course, an intentional act. Both the gust of wind and tiny group of fish were the result of a battle ornament the girl had kept hidden in her stuffed bear. clever method she had used many times in the past to cast arts unnoticed. All of their hard work had paid off. The infiltration had gone exactly as planned. It was yet another successful operation for the boy, known as 3 of Swords, and the girl, known as 9 of Swords, in their life as professional assassins. To be continued. Chapter 2, 3 and 9. At its scheduled time, the ship departed. As he watched the shoreline shrink into the distance, 3 of Swords spoke in a cold, flat voice. Target presence confirmed. Have you pinpointed enemy positioning? Is our route prepared? Yep, we're good to go. The young girl, known as 9 of Swords, stood behind the boy, answering in a relaxed drawl, the polar opposite of her partner's icy tone. Having been dispatched by the organization, the two laid the groundwork for their mission, the assassination of the man responsible for this voyage, the wealthy merchant Haldor Barn. The organization was not particular about how they dealt with their targets, whether in swift silence or via raucous violence. Their only real concern was making sure they did not draw the attention of the Bracer Guild or the local police. As a hard rule, 3 and 9 would always select the most efficient method available to them. In this case, their mission was to prevent the ship from arriving at Calvard, with Haldor still alive on it. Haldor had strong ties with Heiyue, a sizable criminal organization in the Republic. Should he safely make it to his destination and take refuge under their protection, his extraction and subsequent elimination would prove an exceptionally difficult task. Aside from the engine area, the ship had 3 main floors. The lowest housed a considerable number of general passengers. Naturally, this was where 3 and 9's room was located. The second floor contained a hall used for parties and banquets and meals, as well as other such events. Finally, the third floor featured luxury rooms prepared specifically for noble use. At present, however, the entirety of the floor was reserved by Haldor, who was enjoying the comforts of the room in the furthest back. 3 and 9 put their equipment and tools in order and then sprang into action. Their plan was to head to the hall on the second floor, but not before leaving a little gift on the first. The hall would be packed with passengers once dinner service began. Given that only the ultra-wealthy and those with noble status were in attendance, the menu was likely to be suitably extravagant. Yet once they arrived, they found that Haldor had not elected to appear, perhaps out of caution. This was expected, however. The two took their planned positions in the central area of the room. It's time. 3's quiet murmur was immediately followed by the din of an explosion from the floor below. The passengers began to panic. Their fears slowly subsided to uneasiness as security personnel deployed and headed to the first floor to investigate the situation. In truth, the explosion had been caused by a small makeshift bomb that 3 and 9 had placed in an unoccupied room. The blast wasn't particularly powerful, but it was enough to ignite a small number of fires in the area. Their goal was to lure out security, and in that regard, the bomb had more than served its purpose. The plan was progressing apace. "Guess I'm up," 9 said in her usual lackadaisical drawl. She gathered up the edges of her skirt in her hands and gently swayed it back and forth, resulting in a number of black spheres thudding down to the floor. A series of muffled pops reverberated through the hall, heralding a cloud of smoke and tear gas that quickly filled the room. "What's going on? I can hardly breathe. My eyes are tearing up." The gas wasn't especially strong and would have no lasting effects on its victims. However, it was more than enough to send the already uneasy group of elites into a full-blown panic. 3 and 9 then began the next stage of their plan, the infiltration on the third floor. Currently, the bulk of security was on the first floor, meaning they would have to pass all the way through the second in order to respond to any emergencies at the top of the ship. The large numbers of panicking passengers on the second floor wouldn't stall security for long, but the situation would still buy 3 and 9 all the time they would need. So far, the assassins' plan had gone flawlessly. Still, that didn't mean killing Haldor would be easy once they had reached him. The two hid themselves in a stairwell on the third floor and scouted ahead. 2 more there, from what I can see. It looks like we'll have to deal with 5. Looks like we'll have 5 to deal with. 9 shared her observations with 3 in a hushed tone. He silently nodded in acknowledgement. One look at the man standing guard ahead was enough to tell they were neither typical passengers nor ship security. They were well armed. Their combat experience was practically carved into their hardened faces. Ex-Jaegers, huh? It was clear they had been hired not to protect the general guests, but to personally attend the Haldor. Given that his room was located in the very back of the ship, it meant that the only way to reach him was through the battle-hardened veterans that currently barred 3 and 9's path. Avoiding a fight simply wasn't on the cards this time. I'll take lead. As she said this, 9 began to casually walk forward, her posture relaxed. She made no attempt to hide her approach, and even when the guards heard her footsteps and turned to look, they didn't register her as a threat, an advantage afforded by her candy-sweet exterior. Little lady, you're not allowed up here without permission, one of the guards said in a gravely voice. Yeah, we know there's been some kind of disturbance downstairs. We know there's been some kind of disturbance downstairs, another chimed in. But this isn't an evacuation site. Get yourself back to your room. Their tone was a bit harsh, but considering they used to be Jaegers, their attitude toward 9 was almost amicable. She gestured towards Haldor's room. But I want to go in there. Pretty please? And I wasn't putting on the spoiled noble act she had used to sneak aboard the ship earlier in the day. This was probably as close to her genuine sleepy intonation as she would allow during a mission. You want to meet with Mr. Haldor, do ya? Well, today ain't your lucky day, kid, because we got strict orders to not let anyone into this room. And there's nothing I can do to change your mind? 9 tilted her head as she spoke. Her presence began to unnerve the guards. No, nothing, one of them finally responded. Oh, I see. That really is too bad. Despite her words, 9 didn't seem especially disappointed by their response. Taking her plush bear in hand, she suddenly thrust it out in front of her. There was a flash of silver and a loud followed by the thud of 2 guards collapsed into the ground. Their necks had each been pierced by 2 needles, which had been tipped and poisoned, a specialty of 9's and the mainstay in combat. Ordinarily hidden within the bear, the needles could be used to quickly disperse various types of poison through a target's body when thrown at a vital point. 9 would typically carry up to 10 types of poisons, each suitable for a different situation. Depending on the circumstances, she would even use poison-free needles on occasion. This time, 9 had struck the 2 bodyguards with a neurotoxin that robbed the body of its ability to freely move. While not strong enough to kill, it was definitely enough to immobilize someone of substantial size for a good while. What the? Having sensed something amiss, one of the remaining bodyguards down the hall turned to see what was happening. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted a figure quickly moving in his direction. Before he could quickly find out what was happening, however, a blade flashed before his eyes, and he was on the ground, incapacitated along with his fellow comrades. The swift takedown was executed by 3. He wielded a longsword with a thin blade that appeared sharp enough to cut the very air around it. Its construction resembled that of traditional Eastern swords, albeit with a straight blade instead of the typical curved one. Its design was surprisingly ornate, and curiously enough, it seemed to be missing the hilt guard and part of the blade near its base. The 2 remaining bodyguards had seen what had happened and had each already dropped into a fighting stance. No matter how youthful their opponents, it was clear that they had no intention of pulling their punches. You little bastards! Yelled one of them as he began swinging his axe downwards. 3 met the attack with his sword, locking the assassin and the bodyguard in place. Seeing an opening, the other bodyguard drew his sword and attempted to stab 3. While still holding the axe in place with his right hand, 3 quickly drew a short sword with his left, using it to deflect the second bodyguard's attack in one clean motion. The short sword resembled the long sword in nearly all aspects but length. Unlike the long sword, it had a hilt guard. However, it seemed incomplete somehow, as though it was missing a piece. It was much less an offensive weapon than the longsword, being used mainly for defense. Despite his best efforts to fend off the attackers, it seemed as though 3 would quickly be overpowered. Even for him, it was difficult to hold back the weight of an attack from a grown man with only his right hand. Sensing that he needed to do something quickly, 3 intentionally stopped pushing back on the axe, deflecting it harmlessly to the side. With his remaining strength, he whipped around to face his staggering assailant and plunged his short sword deep into his torso. The other bodyguard quickly launched a flurry of attacks, with 3 pushed the critically wounded axe-wielder into his comrade. The sword-wielding bodyguard was momentarily taken off guard, and 3 capitalized on the opening, cutting him down with both swords. Right, that should be... 3 turned to notify 9 that the guards had all been dispatched, but as he did, he saw the door to the VIP room open behind her. Outstepped another ex-Jaeger, weapon drawn, his sights set on attacking the defenseless 9 while her guard was torn. Too much space separated them for 3 to warn 9 in time. He pushed off his back heel with all his might, but stopped his dash a split second later, as did the final bodyguard. My, you're pretty sharp. I was wondering how long it'd take you to catch on. 9 turned lazily on her heel and cast a derisive glance over her shoulder. Her expression remained unfazed as thin, red stripes appeared over the Jaeger's arms and legs. Blood beginning to trickle out like sanguine tears. You do well to keep still. Wriggle too much and you'll be leaving in far more pieces than you arrived. Her sweet appearance made her remarks all the more disconcerting and ghastly. The ex-Jaeger understood that this was no empty threat. He truly couldn't afford to take another step. The cause of his painful predicament was a web of superfine steel wires surrounding him. Thanks to their special processing, the wires were roughly as sharp as a drawer full of top-end kitchen knives. 9 had laid a trap outside the door, one that an unassuming person would have been hard-pressed to detect with the naked eye. Any unfortunate soul who tried to pass through the area with any degree of speed would have soon found themselves the centerpiece of a grisly, blood-spattered tableau. The wires connected to specially designed needles 9 had used as her main weapon. Such wire was notoriously difficult to use, and was rarely regarded as being sufficiently powerful to use as one's only means of attack. While there were rumors of true masters who needed no other implements to eliminate their target, 9 had yet to attain such a quite level of skill with them. That said, she was still a menace in her own right, and a fiendishly clever master of traps besides, as the ex-Jaeger had just learned. 9 tossed a poison needle at her immobilized foe with minimal effort, and her hapless victim collapsed to the floor. She tilted her head to the side as she noticed 3 staring at her. What? Is something wrong, S? She asked, using the nickname she preferred to call 3 by. She would often refer to herself as N, which 3 took as a shortened version of 9, but when she spoke with 3, she would use S instead of T. He'd assumed it to be short for swords, despite the word being part of both their names, but he had never bothered to ask. Nothing at all. 3 tersely responded as he turned to face the VIP room door. At last, the pair stepped into the room housing their target, Haldor Barn. Chapter 3: The Assassins and the Target. Inside, the room was opulence made manifest, best of the best, enough to make the wealthiest noble envious. In the center of its spacious layout sat Haldor Barn, reclined on a sofa. He brought a glass of wine to his lips as his features twisted in a wry, unpleasant expression. Absolute incompetence! Such a simple job, and yet apparently one completely beyond them. Mr. Barn had fully grasped the situation. He had given the order that no one be allowed in, yet there were now 2 children standing before him. Given the commotion outside, it had been easy to guess what had happened. Though their appearances made it hard to believe, the 2 standing before him were no doubt professional assassins, here for his life. Still, Haldor maintained his composure. He kept this realization hidden, and didn't allow so much as a hint of panic to creep into his features. The source of this confidence was a certain colossal machine that sat on the floor before him. Its mere presence made even the impossibly spacious room feel cramped. It towered over 2 arms in height, with 6 spider-like legs protruding from its body. Its humanoid upper half stood erect, with 4 menacing arms stretching out from it. The entire machine emitted an eerie glow, making for a most intimidating sight to behold. "Wowee, that's a big one," 9 remarked, glancing up at it. "An archaism," 3 exclaimed, immediately shifting to a battle stance. "This beauty is a new favorite of mine, a rather fruitful find at a recent back alley auction I happened to attend, and it wasn't cheap, let me tell you. But no, I didn't stop there. I'm a man who doesn't do things by half measures. I paid a princely sum to have an outfit with the most cutting-edge technology available. Mere well spent, in my opinion. I dare say it has enough firepower to easily wipe out an entire platoon of soldiers if I wanted to. In fact, it'd be mere child's play." Barely able to contain his smug grin, Haldor looked like a boastful child showing off his expensive toy at school. "So, the bums outside were just bouncers then? And this monstrosity is what's actually here to protect you," 3 deduced. "Oh, a sharp one. That's precisely correct," Haldor said gleefully. "As long as I have it by my side, my safety here is guaranteed, and once I make it to the Republic, I'll be untouchable." He let out a long laugh, his voice rising higher and higher, echoing endlessly through the gaudy chamber. Shockingly stupid. He really is an idiot, huh? The duo's comments weren't born from simple overconfidence. Even if they did somehow fail in their mission, and even if Haldor did somehow manage to make it to Heyway territory, he had already been marked for death by the organization. They would pursue him to the bitter end, to the last man. He had 0 chance of survival. "Attack!" At Haldor's order, the archaism lurched into action. It set its sights on 3 and charged straight for him. 9 took the opportunity to begin casting her arts. While her partner specialized in close quarters combat, she was a force to be reckoned with when it came to orbital arts. As she began the charge, however, one of the archaism's arms rapidly folded out into a gun, the muzzle pointed in 9's direction. Without delay, it sprayed a hail of bullets at her. Whoa! 9 evaded the gunfire by a hair's breadth, but was forced to abandon casting her art. The archaism focused its attention back on 3, who was busy fending off its melee attacks with his longsword. 9 sprinted to the other side of the room and started her cast again. The machine's aim was too adept, however, as she found herself unable to escape it long enough to get an art off. It appeared that their foe was equipped with a powerful arts detection sensor, one that allowed to identify incoming orbital attacks and counterattack before they could be launched. Forced to abandon her casting yet again, 9 screwed up her face in frustration and sullenly gripped her plush bear. "Huh, this thing doesn't play nice. I quit," she said in a huff. It was a fair point. Poison-tipped needles wouldn't have been particularly effective against the steel plating of a machine. Without the ability to cast her arts, 9 found herself at a loss. 3, however, remained unperturbed and readied himself for another onslaught. "I'm going to grab a little shut-eye. Wake me up when the fighting's over, okay?" 9 said as she flopped down on one of the room's sofas, using her as a pillow. "9! Cut it out! I need you to stay awake!" 3 shouted from across the room. Despite this, 9 didn't react at all. As she dozed, the archaism seemed to disregard her as a threat and fully focused its attention on 3. Its 4 arms, transformed into a sword, a lance, an axe, and a gun, proceeded to launch a relentless string of attacks at the already overwhelmed assassin. 3 leapt out of the way as the machine's sword arm cut an arc through the air, only to then see the lance rocketing toward him. He narrowly avoided it, but his escape was blocked by a mighty swing of the axe. Meanwhile, the archaism had its gun trained in Haldor's direction. Even in the heat of combat, it prioritized protecting its master against any approaching threats. Swift movements and deft swordplay were the foundation of 3's combat style, but they were of little use against such a powerful machine. The archaism was simply too fast, and his attacks were both explosively powerful and aimed with deadly precision. Further, its 6 legs afforded it perfect balance, and its multiple arms allowed it to launch attacks faster than 3 could keep up. To his irritation, 3 found his skill set completely useless against the metal monstrosity. Sure, he was a better fit for the task than Nine, but only by a slim margin. Regardless, he continued to fight, both blades flashing as they moved to intercept his foe. The sheer number of attacks coming at him forced 3 to focus entirely on defense. He parried, dodged, and deflected the relentless wave of strikes, biding his time, waiting for the machine to leave an opening for him to strike with his longsword. This violent dance continued on for some time. 3 had managed to land a number of blows to the machine's body and arms, but each had resulted in no more than a metallic twang as his blade was repelled by its solid metal armor. It's no use, child. That armor was specially commissioned, and your pathetic little butter knives don't have a snowball's chance of Gehenna against him. Haldor's mocking tone grated on 3's nerves. He was made worse by the fact it was clear he wasn't lying. 3's attacks had been completely ineffective so far. Still, 3 had yet to suffer any wounds. Given how things were going, though, it was only a matter of time before he was slowly worn down. Analysis complete. 9 suddenly began speaking, apparently having woken up from her nap. Still lounging on the sofa, she continued, her voice flatter and more precise than usual. Arms, joint 1, down 5 reg. Legs, joint 2, up 3 reg. Waist, rotation axis center. Left side of chest, up 2/5, left 1/5. The first to respond was not 3, but Haldor. You little wench! How did you do that? He was flustered, clearly shocked that 9 had figured out the archaism's structural weak points. 9 suddenly rose from the sofa and reverted back to her usual drawl, sleepily rubbing her eyes as she spoke. I could tell by the sound. It takes a bit of concentration, though. Pure disbelief was etched into Haldor's face. 3, on the other hand, looked as composed as ever. He had known from the start what 9 was doing. He was simply buying time until the analysis was complete. S, now! Right. 3 readied himself and rushed the archaism. His swordplay swifter than ever, a veritable tornado of slashes and stabs. Each of his attacks hit upon one of the weak points that 9 had pointed out. He slowly switched to the short sword and performed the same volley of attacks, hitting each point a second time. But the result was the same as before, nothing save the same high-pitched metallic sound that rang out with each hit. It didn't appear that the archaism had been damaged in the slightest. Haldor was beside himself with laughter, relishing watching the young assassin struggle. What a joke! You can swing those little swords of yours until the palms come home, but you're never getting through that armor. All part of the process. Letting the simple reply linger in the air, 3 lined up his short sword with the empty section in the base of his longsword. 2 blades locked in place, becoming a single weapon, the sharp edges lining up perfectly. At first glance, it would be difficult to tell that the 2 were ever anything other than a single sword. Haldor watched the process with interest, but then burst into mocking laughter a moment later. Proud of your pocket knife, little boy? Do you honestly think that'll be your ticket to victory? Truth be told, even if in its combined state, the reach of 3's sword hadn't improved any, nor was the weapon sharper or faster. The slightly increased weight of the blade may have provided some increase in power, but certainly not enough to break through the archaism's thick armor. Given the opponent a hand, the weapon truly seemed little better than a toy. 3 chose to remain silent and let his weapon do the talking. He swung it at the weak point on the archaism's legs, the same spot he had targeted before. This time, however, the strike was followed by a loud explosion, and the archaism's leg flew across the room. The blast seemed to have come within the archaism itself, and was powerful enough to have blown its limb clean off. The blast appeared similar to that of a fire elementar, but neither 3 nor 9 had appeared to have cast anything. Even if they had, the archaism sensor would have surely detected it. What the? Haldor stammered, his face twisted with shock and fear. Another swing by 3's sword. Followed by another explosion, a second of the archaism's limbs was sent flying into the corner of the room. What the hell is going on? Haldor screeched, no longer trying to hide his panic. His tone quickly deteriorated from alarm to abject terror. This is no ordinary sword, when he began to speak, his face devoid of expression. It's fully integrated with the battle ornament, forming a single weapon. Well, strictly speaking, I suppose it's closer to that to an ordinary orbman than a battle orbman. As he spoke, he continued his attack, his swordplay not pausing for even a second. An orbman with a single function, a controlled explosion on points I designate. However, its activation requires each blade to have separately made contact with the intended target area. You can think of the marks as targeting coordinates, essentially. Even though 3's initial attacks seemed to have been repelled, they were actually preparatory steps in this process. The subsequent explosions were the true attack. The third strike to the same location, this time made with the unified blade, results in the explosion. The location and timing specifications were complicated, as was the use of the specialized orbman in conjunction with some automated processing. The end result was an instantaneous cast time, however. If the wielder was skilled enough, they'd be able to launch powerful arts attacks without the need of any charge-up period. It was in this ability that the true value of 3's weapon lay. But having suffered an enormous amount of damage from the rapid strikes unleashed on it, the Archaism began throwing sparks in all directions. It began to dawn on Haldor that victory was no longer an option for him, and he began desperately looking for a means of escape. Stop! Stop fighting and get me out of here now! He ordered the Archaism in a shrill yell. Reacting to his new orders, the machine quickly rotated its torso and began moving towards him. I don't think so, a lazy voice called out from across the room. During the commotion, its remaining spider-like legs had been bound with a complex of webbed steel wire, rendering it immobile. This is the end. This is the end. 3 quickly struck its remaining weak points in rapid succession. The resulting series of explosions tore the machine to pieces, littering its surroundings with burnt steel and charred components. When the smoke had been cleared, the room was so full of broken parts, it was more scrapyard than sweet. The remainder of the Archaism's body ceased all functions and collapsed, its chassis mangled beyond recognition. 3 deftly wove his way through the junk scattered at his feet, silently moving toward Haldor. Stay back! A pitiful squeak escaped Haldor's throat as he scrambled backward, away from the approaching assassin. There was nowhere to run, however. 3's mission was nearing its end, yet he didn't feel happiness or even relief. He took a step closer. He felt his sword suddenly grow heavy in his hand. He forced himself to take another step. His legs felt like they were encased in concrete. His whole body felt like it was desperately rejecting his advance, trying to pull itself away. Another step. This was how it always ended. All that remained was for him to fulfill his role. He was nothing but a tool. A machine. This was how it was supposed to be. 3 took one final step forward. There's no need to share any details with you. Still, I figure you at least deserve to know who's ending your life. To know, 3 thought to himself, whose name to curse as you burn in the fires of Gehenna. I am 3 of Swords. He plunged his blade deep into Haldor's chest, piercing the man's heart. I am an assassination for the organization. By this point, the panic on the second floor had largely subsided, and the ship's security guards were finally starting to move up to the third floor. Picking up on this, 3 and 9 quietly broke open the window and jumped through it to the sea outside. It's a good thing this mission wasn't on an airship. That would have made escaping way more of a pain, 9 remarked. Agreed. She was right. Escaping from an airship would have necessitated a specialized aircraft for the operation, as well as forcing the 2 to leap from ship to ship mid-air. It would have been entirely impossible for the young assassins, though, and surely someone in their wide world had carried out such an operation before. S? 9 softly called out to 3, again using a preferred nickname for him. He was a corrupt man, an evil man. The 2 of them looked back toward the ship. There was no need for further explanation between the 2. Yeah, 3 said quietly. I know. He had been thorough in reading through the mission dossier, and knew that 9 spoke true. Haldor was a bastard through and through, one that had performed all kinds of horrible acts in pursuit of Mira. His mere existence sullied the world, and